Jared, thanks for joining me on the SteadFast Running podcast.
Yeah, Jonathan, thanks for having me. Looking forward to the conversation.
You coach for Run Free Training. You've run 2:17:50 in the marathon, but your story begins in Atlanta, where you grew up playing soccer and where you started running in ninth grade, mostly to stay in shape for soccer. I'd like for you to talk about your high school coach first and the impact he had on you.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, for me, it all started in high school when it came to running. I was an avid soccer player. And it's funny because the World Cup's going on right now as we're having this conversation, and it's been fun to kind of get back into that a little bit. It brings back memories of when I was in elementary school and middle school. It was all about soccer. So for me, getting into cross country in high school was like when people say, oh, I just want to get in shape for soccer, like it was to get in shape for soccer only. It was a fall sport. Soccer was in the spring, and I needed to fill my time doing something. So when I entered high school, the very first coach I had in cross country and running, track, whatever you want to call it, he had a huge impact on me. I didn't know anything about the sport. I didn't like running. I didn't want to be there. It was just simply the motivation to get in shape for soccer. And there was something I think that he saw in me that gave me kind of hope to continue doing this down the road. I mean, to this day, I would not have run in college if it had not been for him. His name was Coach Harden. And then I remember when I qualified for the Olympic trials, I called him and I was like, I would not be here today if it had not been for you, not for your initial coaching, not for your just motivation to keep doing this. And honestly, like I think one of the things you'll hear me talk about a lot tonight is the process and the journey. And he instilled a lot of that in me, like just not getting wrapped up in results only, not getting wrapped up in just times, like enjoying the process and looking at this as longevity and as something that is something you want to be able to enjoy for a long period of time and not looking to just get instant gratification. So, yeah, I mean, we wouldn't be having this conversation if it hadn't been for someone like him to inspire me to continue doing this.
Similar to you, I didn't take running very seriously until my junior year of high school. And sometimes I think about how my trajectory in the sport would have changed had I started earlier. And there are pros and cons to early specialization, but one of the things that I missed out on was the opportunity to run at the next level with better competition and training partners. Now, you did run at Shorter University in the NAIA division, and that's where you met Coach Jay Stevenson, which is important. I want to get to that next. But do you think your trajectory in the sport would have been different had you started focusing on running earlier in your career?
I think that's a great question. And I obviously look back now at high school kids and how fast they're running. And I think the sport has changed so much in 20 years, to where running is a sport now and running is exciting and kids get excited about the sport and they want to do better. They read about it, they watch videos, they interact with their friends and their competitors on Strava and on the internet. Um, but I don't know. I think for me, I am happy with starting in high school. I worry sometimes I would have been burnt out, if I had started too early, because I know, especially over the past 10 years when my running got a lot more competitive, especially in the marathon distance. I know emotionally where that took me to get to that level. And I think if I had been doing that even longer than I already have been doing it, it would have it would have probably worn on me maybe even sooner than it did. So
And Jared, what were your times coming out of high school? Just out of curiosity.
yeah, I mean it to today's standards, not fast. I think in the mile I ran 440. In the 2 mile I ran 9:52, and the 5K 16:30. And I ran 16:30 as a junior in high school. and then ran the same thing as a senior. It was really not till college before I had that kind of that breakthrough. But it's funny, Jonathan, like when I think back to high school, I always just made sure I stayed focused on little small goals. And what I mean by that is like when I first started running, it was just motivation for soccer, right? And then halfway through the season, I thought, like my team's not that big. Like maybe I can be the top runner as a freshman. And like that was the motivation to get to a little bit faster time. So I improved as a freshman. Then sophomore year rolled around, like, oh, I think I can be the top runner on the team again. Okay, now I think I can maybe get top 20 in county. Okay, I think I can get top 10 in the county next meet and so forth. Well, then junior year rolls around. I think I can qualify for state. So it's like all those little small increments I was making were keeping me motivated, were keeping me present, engaged in the sport. But it was just enough to keep me hungry and wanting more, which I did when I ran in college. And then, I think, a lot of my success in running on the roads has come after college. Um, but I don't know. I think if I had been like crazy fast in high school, there wouldn't have been that motivation to want to continue doing the sport later on as well. So, but yeah, 16:30 was the best in high school. And it's ironic because then, fast forward 15, 18 years later when I ran my marathon PR, that was about my 5K pace for the marathon. So
Yeah, like you say, success breeds success, but when it feels like you still have something left in you, almost like you still have something left to prove, the hunger is greater, I think.
yeah, and I think it's important, like for me at least in my experience, like to prove to yourself. Because one of the things I struggled with in high school and even college was just always trying to beat everyone else, right? Like it was always a measuring stick. Every time I came to the starting line, I knew who was on the starting line. I knew what their PRs were. I knew what I needed to do in order to be placed with them, compete with them. And the moment I let that go and I just started focusing on Jared, my running improved dramatically.
It would be interesting to hear how your approach to training changed when Jay came into your life. And the second part of that is how Jay's training has evolved since then, having worked with him for over 15 years and your life getting busier once you were out of the college system.
Oh, absolutely. So yeah, the high school coach was super influential in getting me started with running. And then Jay Stevenson is the one that really helped to allow me to kind of get to that next stage, that next level in running. He was my college coach. So that's when I met him for the first time. Um, the one thing I will say, and I think this is so important for the coach athlete, is just having that trust and having that faith in your coach, and being willing to work together, being willing to pivot, to make adjustments in your training and your schedule, because our lives change, our schedules change, our bodies change. Like we need to be willing to adapt. And that was one of the things with Jay. When Jay first started coaching me, he was young too. Like he was pretty young as a coach. And he was always wanting to kind of try new things and let's do this instead of that. And let's slower mileage or let's increase intensity or let's run a little bit more mileage. And I always was just his guinea pig. And I was like, all right, let's try it. Let's do it. And I think that's honestly like why it works so well for he and I, because one, we trust each other so much. We're willing to work on evolving our training principles. And I think there's a big stimulus to the body when you do that, because you're now something new is hitting the body, hitting your training and allowing you to improve now because you're not getting stagnant or hitting a plateau. And because of that trust and then just the open communication that Jay and I have, I mean, I laugh and I tell people like when it comes to running, he knows my body better than I do. And that's been 17 years, and I had success with him in college, but I think the biggest success that I would say for myself has been in the marathon. But it took 16, 17 years working together, before we got that. But there wasn't this timeline of rushing stuff, right? It was enjoying that process. That's, the process and the journey again, and being willing to adjust and adapt because, to your point, like I'm 36 years old now. I have a child. I have a full-time job. I coach athletes myself. And I'm running better now than I did when I was 21 in college, complaining about 10, 12 hours of class a week and nothing else to do. Right. So I think learning to just mature, learning to balance, and learning to just not obsess about when a workout goes good or bad, or when a race goes good or bad, um, has been very, very helpful. And then just having the same person's eyes on my training for so long, but also willing to take different perspectives and chat through things together has, I think, been one of the biggest keys to the success that Jay and I have both had.
The fact that you guys have been together for that long speaks to the trust, the communication, the strength of that coach athlete relationship. That's awesome. Awesome to hear. And much is said about the lack of depth in American distance running, the number of guys, for example, who are running right around 220 and even between 220 and 240 is not what it could be if a lot of our kids who run a 16-minute 5K in high school or a 31-minute 10K in college, if they were to continue to run into their late 20s, early 30s. In your case, you didn't stop running competitively after college, at least not permanently. You did take a break for a few years, but then you got your spark back. What's your thinking on why we see so many good runners leave the sport, and how did you avoid going down that path?
No, that's a great question. And I think about that sometimes myself. I think the two things that have helped me is one, I've been very hyper focused on trying to avoid getting burnt out. And I do think that the lack of maybe a I was good in high school, but like I wasn't great. You know, I wasn't getting top 10, top 20 at state. I wasn't getting D1 offers. So that kept me hungry. And I think a lot of my friends who I still am friends with today who were really, really good in high school, they went and they competed at a really high level in college. They just got burnt out really quick. You know, they were at a peak in high school. They peaked a little bit more in college, and then they're like, "Done. I'm tapped out. I can't do anymore." Like this the idea of trying to sustain this schedule in the working world, getting married, having kids. Like I can't do all that anymore. Whereas for me, I didn't really feel like I got burnt out too much through the high school and college phase. And I've been very mindful of trying to avoid getting burnt out. And that means like taking time off sometimes if I need to take time off. Like I have always been, I am not a high mileage guy because high mileage beats my body up physically and it drains me. Like it's running's not fun. And when running is not fun, I'm not going to perform well. And I try and preach that to athletes all the time to make sure they maintain a balance. So there's that element to it. And then I think the other thing that I have struggled with a lot in my running career are injuries. And it might be weird to say, but I feel like the injuries is what has allowed me to run as well as I have into my like late 30s now, because it forces me to take time off. It forces me to completely take a reset. It forces me to reevaluate my training. Um, and then it just keeps me damn hungry. Like I just want to keep coming back for more, right? Like if I just had all the success, I tell people all the time, I think I've been done running competitively 10 years ago. But it's like I start to get a taste of success and then I get knocked back. And then I start to get a taste of success and then I get knocked out again. And so it's just I'm constantly coming back hungry, ready for more. And so I think just trying to be focused on not getting burnt out, and then the fact that I've had to deal with a lot of injuries over the years has kept me hungry. And the thing about injuries is like, yeah, you get injured from actually maybe being able to go out and run, but when you're injured, you're usually doing something else that you wouldn't be doing when you're running. Like you're in the gym more, you're in the pool, you're strengthening something, you're like getting muscles stronger, and it's a weird sensation, man. It's like, sure, you come back and you think to yourself, like, oh, like I feel like I've gained a few pounds or I feel like sluggish, but something also feels stronger, right? Like your legs feel stronger or something you were able to focus on, like ankle and foot mobility or calf, Achilles strength all of a sudden feels stronger now because you rested it, you worked on a lot of strength work. Now you've come back and you feel better. And then when you kind of get back into that running form, now everything starts to click again.
Yeah, and I think something you said in there is really important. At least it struck a chord with me. Running has to be fun. And sometimes I catch some of my own runners, or I call them out when I sense that they're starting to fall out of love with the sport, which is
Yep.
something that's never happened to me personally. I don't know. I might just be, I've been running since high school, but the fire just burns brighter and brighter every year that goes by. And I also have had my injuries, but that may be the anchor we need to stay hooked
Yeah.
on the sport. Is that it's just
Yeah.
got to be, we got to enjoy it.
It's got to be fun. You have to enjoy it. I've always been very mindful of when I start to not enjoy it. You know, when I start to obsess over workout splits, if I start to obsess over mileage, if I find myself starting to not hang out with friends because I got to get like an extra hour, like that's not going to be enjoyable. It's not going to make running fun, and then it becomes this chore. Um, and so I think it's very, very important to make sure you are aware of that, you recognize that, and have the confidence like it's okay to take time off. Like it's actually, if you look at it as like a training principle, like this is actually making you better. And we talk about it at Run Free all the time. It's one of our five fingers is rest, you know, rest, making sure you're taking time off when you need it. And then the 1% of like having that mental edge and being able to be hungry and want to chase after your goals, but you can't do it if you're burnt out. So it's switch the mindset to looking at that as rest can be training and not that you're taking stepwards back in your training.
I want to ask about Bowerman Track Club Elite. A lot of us may be familiar with the work of Jerry Schumacher and Shalane Flanagan with the professional group, but how is the group that you are a part of or were a part of different in terms of coaching and the type of support you receive?
Yeah, so Bowerman Track Club, BTC Elite has kind of evolved a little bit over the years. So Bowerman Track Club, as most people probably know, is a very large organization. It's got obviously the professional athletes, which are coached by Jerry Schumacher and Shalane Flanagan. They used to be here in Beaverton. They are now down the road in Eugene, so we don't see them quite as much. But we have our pro team, and obviously everyone that's a fan of running follows that's part of the program. But then if you live here in Oregon, we have a huge youth program. There's probably 400 youth kids that sign up for Bowerman Track Club each fall and spring. COVID has kind of impacted that a little bit, but that's a huge, huge program. And these kids will start running middle school, elementary, middle school, even up to like kind of some of the high school levels. And we have different groups kind of scattered throughout the Portland, Oregon area. And there are volunteer coaches, a handful of sometimes Nike employees that will help coach or current existing members of Bowerman Track Club that will come and help coach those. So that's a big program. Then we have a master's program that's got a group out here of competitive individuals in the master's area. And then there's BTC Elite. And the BTC Elite program is comprised of, I'd say, a lot of guys and girls who are out of college up until their, mid to late 30s who are still chasing goals, right? They're still running competitively. Most of them are chasing after OTQ qualifiers in the marathon. We've got a handful of guys who are right at the sub 4, if not close to it marker. And the coaching has evolved over the years with that. So I do run with BTC Elite, but when I was training and ran the qualifier in 2018 for the marathon, I was coached still by Jay, and it just worked for me. We have a coach who coaches the BTC Elite team, but he is totally fine. If you have a coaching situation that works well for you, then do that. And so I think having a group environment, there's multiple things you can get out of a group environment that can benefit your running success. One is the coaching, but two is just the camaraderie and having that group. So our group is kind of split a little bit between the marathon group and the track group. That's starting to change now. But when I was training in 2018, myself and a group of other marathoners, we kind of did our thing. And a lot of times we did a lot of just the workouts that I had because they're like, oh, what are you doing today, Jared? I'm like, oh, I'm doing this. They're like, that's close enough to what we were going to do. We'll all just do that together. And then we kind of had our track group. But just having each other there to warm up, cool down, cheer each other on during our session, like that in itself made a big difference. And we all communicate and try and make sure that like we know what the others are doing. And so it's like, oh, I was going to go long on Sunday, but you're going Saturday. Yeah, I'll jump in and join you because it's going to benefit you and me. It will help each other out. Um, and so, yeah, it's been great to kind of have that group here because you've got people to hold you accountable, which is great. You just have to pick and choose when you run together, right? Because someone's going to always feel good when you have a group of 15, 20 guys running. And so for me, I personally always tried to link up with those guys on long run days and then workout days, and then just stick to easy running by myself because I like to run slow on my easy days. So,
Yeah, thank you for that explanation. Now I see how comprehensive that whole program is. And in a few years, I'll be 40, and I think I need to move to Oregon and join the Masters Club because we struggle here in Florida with that type of thing. Hate to say it, but it's true. And I'd like to be a part of a group of like-minded individuals.
yep, no, absolutely. I mean, they've got a group going down, a couple of groups going down to cross club cross this weekend. And then our masters team, I see are actively always running together and at races as well. So it's fun. It's fun to have that.
You also trained with a group of runners in the Austin area prior to joining Bowerman, but Bowerman TC really did seem to bring out the best in you. So before moving to Portland, you had run a 2:35 marathon in Austin. That was 2017. But after moving to Portland, you had this big breakthrough at the 2018 Eugene Marathon running 2:24. And that came off the coattails of Boston training, which we all know was a bad weather year in Boston. Granted, that race in Eugene was not really indicative of your fitness at the time because you ran most of it by yourself, and the last 8 miles or so in Eugene are not the fastest. But I guess what I'm trying to say is, was it a change in the environment, a change in lifestyle, or a change in training, perhaps, that would explain this jump in fitness? Because the difference between 2:35 and sub 2:20, which you eventually got at CIM in 2018, is massive. And in my prime, I could have possibly run a 2:35, but sub 2:20, not even in my wildest dreams.
Yeah. So there's a lot to unpack there. So I'll provide some context of kind of when the build up to the marathon started after college. And what you mentioned in there, a lot of that I would say contributed to ultimately running 2:17 in the marathon. But when I graduated from college, I actually took a little bit time off from running. I just was trying to get accustomed to working and out of college and living in the city of Atlanta at the time, and I kind of took some time off, but I never completely got out of shape. I always kind of maintained enough fitness to when I got motivated enough to start running again or racing again, I could. And so I started racing again a few years out of college, and it was 5K, 10Ks. Hadn't really dabbled with the longer stuff quite yet. And then I moved to Austin, Texas in May of 2013 for job and personal reasons. And when I got there, I met a group of individuals who were very competitive runners. They were faster than me. And and this will be important when I talk about when I moved to Portland as well. I think a new stimulus is always so important as a runner, and I use that word all the time with athletes, like doing something different, whether it's a new training group, a new environment, a new type of training. Like, I think it's really important and it impacts the body in a positive way. So going to Austin, I'd kind of gotten comfortable in Atlanta with my running. I had my routes, I had my races, I had my crew. I did kind of the safe workouts, and then it was good enough to just kind of like compete, win races here and there, but it wasn't running like crazy fast. Well, then I went to Austin, met a new group of guys to run with who were faster than me, and it just took me to a whole new level, right? And there was an adaptation phase for sure. Like, I got my butt kicked in workouts for a while. One of the guys I would say I linked up with, who's one of my best friends, say David Fuentes. He's a great runner. He's run multiple times the Olympic trials. He's a 63-minute half marathon guy. Started working out with him a lot, and just like would hang on for dear life. But over the months, like, started getting to where I could start to hang with him. And so having that group in Austin really helped me start improving my 10K and my half marathon performances. So I went and ran a half marathon. I don't remember exactly what year it was, and I ran 67 and change. And I was like, oh wow, like that was pretty good. That was a pretty good time. And like, I actually really enjoyed that because I never have felt like I was crazy, crazy fast enough to run really, really fast in like a 5K or shorter, but I can run fairly fast and hold that pace for a long time. So I was like, oh, sweet. The half marathon's like my sweet spot now. And I was like, 67 and change wasn't that bad. I can do that twice. I'm going to run a marathon next month. And this is like dumb young Jared who didn't know anything about the marathon distance yet. And so I call up Jay and I'm like, hey, I've been kind of doing some stuff of my own with the Austin guys here, but like I want to do a marathon next month. So can you give me some long runs to do? And he's like, this is not going to go well, but let's just try it. So that was the 235 in Austin you're talking about. Um, no, fast forward, rewind. There was actually a 242 I ran first, my very first marathon ever. I ran like 242, I think it was. And you're typical what you would expect. I blew up. I went out well ahead of myself. I didn't have anyone to run with the Austin Marathon that year. I gapped myself and ended up walking and like taking bathroom breaks. It was a disaster, but I made it across the line. And that kind of gave me the bug of like, okay, how do I want to figure this marathon thing out? So I just kind of kept doing that, trying to figure out the marathon distance. But I ran another half marathon in Houston, Texas, ran another 67. That kept me hungry for the longer stuff. And then I ended up moving to Portland at the end of 2016. And then the same thing happened, right? Like I was in a new environment. I had a new place to run. I had a new group of athletes to train and run with. And so that started to kind of get me excited again about trying to now figure out the marathon. So, we fast forward to 2018. I had started working at Nike. I had a group of individuals there I was running with, was running on campus, great facilities, and then just didn't have any injuries in 2018. So I had a full year of training, and training was going really, really well leading up to the Boston Marathon in 2018. So I was fit, had some of the best workouts I've ever had, was able to run consistent mileage. And then, as we all know, 2018 Boston Marathon was a torrential downpour. I tried to run, got borderline hypothermia, got pulled off the course at mile 10 and ended up canning that race altogether. But the fitness was there. So I wanted to capitalize on that fitness. So that's when I went to Eugene Marathon, which was a couple weeks later that you were referencing, and ran 224. And that time was, I on paper I felt like I could run faster, but based on that and on that day, it was that race gapped out. Like there wasn't a group to run with. There was one guy way off the front. I think he won in like 221, 222. And then I just kind of ran by myself for the majority of the race. So I ran 224, but I did that by myself in not a overly competitive race. And then when that wrapped up, I recovered, and then training started for 2018 CIM, which was obviously the PR race for me.
Now that makes so much more sense. Those early attempts that you made at the marathon were made on suboptimal marathon training. Maybe that's putting it nicely, right? So it wasn't really indicative of your potential as a runner.
No, I didn't think I was going to be serious in the marathon, because keep in mind I was late 20s, early 30s. Like I was working full time. I was trying to figure out my career. I was moving for work as well. Like the marathon at first was just like, I'm just doing a marathon because I just want to do a marathon. But it was the success I had in a half marathon for me that kept me kind of hungry. And I was like, well, let me figure this out. So did a couple marathons, but then when I got to Portland and met up with the guys here, they were all training for the marathon. So I was like, all right, well, let me take advantage and jump in with this group and let's all run together and see what we can do.
One of the things that you and your coach learned is that you break down when going above something like 85 miles per week. Correct me if I'm wrong, but 70, 80 miles per week, whatever that number is for you, and that your response to track work is maybe not as robust as your response to sub threshold running. And unfortunately, you did have a stress fracture, a sacral stress fracture in 2019 that caused you to drop out of the trials at halfway. How are you structuring your training for the 2024 trials in Orlando?
So, yeah, I mean, I learned in college that mileage just doesn't work very well for me. I wanted to be a high mileage guy, but every time I got up to 80, 85 miles a week, I just started getting tired. Something started hurting. I had I've had two stress fractures. I had a stress fracture in my shin years ago. Um, and so that was kind of a one reason, like dial it back. And then the sacral stress fracture you mentioned. So I learned in college that I could get confidence from having quality workouts, and having good quality workouts was enough confidence to get me to the starting line and feeling like I could go run what I was capable of running over the mileage. And so I've always just mixed in cross training. And so even in 2018, when I was building up and ran CIM and then building up for the trials in 2020, I ran 70, 65 to 80 miles a week, and then would try and supplement getting in the pool once or twice a week for either swimming or pool running. Or I would hop on the bike. I have a spin bike, and I'd hop on the bike for 30 to 50 minutes a couple times a week to just get some extra cardio in that way. But for me, I get the confidence in the workouts, and if I'm able to hit quality workouts, that does it for me. I'm very particular about how I structure my running. I don't like to do more than two workouts a week, and so I do one workout during the week that's more interval, more 5K, 10K type work that's running faster than marathon pace, and then on the weekends I incorporate marathon pace, half marathon pace within my long run, and I just get a lot of bang for my buck. The workouts usually go well because I'm not overly tired. And then I don't beat myself up, and I'm able to keep that consistency, because if I try and do too much, then I can't be consistent. And I've just learned for me over the years, consistency is the key. And so that's what tends to work best for me. And so as far as 2024 goes, I'm actually taking a little bit of downtime right now because I'm fighting through an Achilles issue again. And so I think that's the key. It's just like listening to your body, knowing when to dial back. I know what it takes to get to a qualifying time. I know what it takes to feel fit. But I can't do that if I'm not physically feeling good. And so it's taken a lot of years to get to this point, but just having the confidence to pause training when I need to, because again, going back to what I said earlier, it's like that is training. Taking that time off is training. And then I'll build up and I'll do the same thing again, 65 to 80 miles a week of running. And I'll incorporate cross training in there as well, because I know that works well for me. I'm not getting any younger. And so being able to really be focused on those quality run sessions is what I know will work best for me.
Yeah, I'm sorry to hear about your Achilles, but it's clear that you've developed this maturity and this perspective on things that's truly admirable. Theoretically, if you could handle more mileage and you had the time, do you think that you could get a few extra minutes out of that? Or is there an argument to be made, you think, that even if someone can run more, the sweet spot for marathon training should be dictated more around factors such as the quality of your sessions and how well you recover between your sessions?
No, that's a great question. And it's a question that I don't personally think about that so much myself anymore for me, because I just know what works well for me. But I have this conversation with athletes all the time. I literally just had this conversation with an athlete yesterday. And yeah, I mean, I think if you can handle running more mileage for the marathon, then yeah, I think that is going to be a key to success. I think there's few and far between that can handle the 130, 140, 150s. And there have been athletes who have done that, and they've said that was too much. I mean, Ryan's a perfect example of that. He's like, that was too much mileage, right? Like, I sacrificed gym routine, core routine. I sacrificed my levels of energy because of running that too much. But I do think that you can find that sweet spot. Maybe that's 90 for some people, maybe that's 110 for some people. But the two things that I always tell athletes when it comes to mileage, can I run more mileage? I always say, sure, let's try it. But if you start to feel like the quality of your workouts during the week is suffering, that's a perfect example hey, we might want to dial this back a little bit. And then two, um, if you start feeling burnt out, like you got to dial it back. And burnt out can come in a couple different ways. Maybe you're tired. Maybe you're having a hard time falling asleep at night because you're just exhausted, or you're thinking too much about how am I going to get that double in? Or if you find yourself starting to um, pull away and not want to hang out with your friends and have social activities and spend time with your family because you're so consumed with your training, like that's another example of like we probably should dial it back a little bit. Um, but you kind of have to work with each athlete and you sort of have to figure that out a little bit, right? And I think that's the risk that you have to take is like, hey, you maybe can run faster if you run a little bit more mileage, but we have to be willing that something might suffer. And if it does, we'll address that and we'll peel it back. But now we're several weeks into training. Let's then we're gonna have to readjust now. So when I do play with mileage with athletes, I like to try and do so not in the peak of marathon training, right? Like when we're within the 12-week range, 14-week range, even, I'm kind of like, let's stick to what we know works for the training. But in between seasons, when people are starting to kind of come back, and we don't have a lot of structure yet, that's our perfect time, I think, where you can start to mess around with some of that stuff.
I don't know if this is still true, but I've heard you say that after 2024, you might open a new chapter in your life and stop running competitively. I'm someone, like I said earlier, who enjoys hardcore training and racing. I've been doing this for over 20 years. And even though I'm getting slower, what I enjoy is going through the process, the grind, the planning, the race day feels. But I like to hear different perspectives on this. How do you think your relationship to running will change in the foreseeable future?
I always know that running will be in my life, right? Like I will, whether it's continuing to coach, whether it's continuing to go for easy runs, um, traveling to races to see friends run. I know I'll always be involved in the sport. I love the sport too much to not be. But I also have to be um mindful that I have been doing this at a high level for a long time. And as much as I do love running, what really gets me excited and motivated is racing. Like I love the race, and it's not to compete against other people; it's to compete against myself and see how much more I can improve. And so, getting up early, doing the workouts, doing the cross training, running when it's cold, running when it's raining in Portland, which is a lot here in the wintertime. Like it's the races that motivates me to get through all that. And so I'm like, do I see myself doing that into my 40s? I don't know. And so I laugh all the time and say, like, I don't think I'm going to be one of those that's like competitively running in my 40s. And then friends will be like, yeah, you say that now, but then when Masters hits, you're going to change your mind. And maybe they'll be right. I don't know. But I do think that I'll stay involved in the sport. But there's a lot of things that like I haven't done over the years that I would like to do. Like I picked up golf recently because I have so many friends that golf, and I'm like, this could be a perfect way to like still be active and social with your friends and not just do so sitting over dinner or drinks, right? Um, and skiing, I live in the Northwest, so we have great access to places to go ski. I don't really do that a lot in the winter because it's always been like, oh, I'm training for something. I don't want to go do that. So I think there are things that like for my life that I just get excited about that I want to be more active in, knowing that running will always have a place, but being able to just be happy and satisfied with what I have accomplished in running and also be able to just and then take that and educate and teach other people to see it's really exciting to watch these future generations come up and run. I was at CIM this weekend because I had two athletes running down there, and a couple of people were like, oh, is it hard being here and not running because I was supposed to run? And I was like, I thought it would be, but it's not because I'm so excited to see these athletes running right now. And they both ran PRs. And so it's just as a coach to watch your athletes just pour it out on the streets, like that was so rewarding that I wasn't even thinking about a race for myself on that day.
Yes, speaking of that, let's talk more now about your work as a coach. It's not your full-time job, but you do coach a number of athletes through Run Free Training. Tell us more about the nature of that work and maybe some of the lessons that you've learned working with people of all ages and ability levels.
Yeah. So let's see, when I graduated college, I was managing a running store in Atlanta. And that's kind of where some of the coaching started to come in place because we're just working at a running store. We had run groups coming by all the time. And so people would come in and just want to get running advice, right? Hey, I'm training for this 10K coming up. What do you got any recommendations? Hey, like, what are some of your favorite workouts? How should I structure this? And then I had two individuals in particular who were um, part of our run group, and they said, "Hey, can you get me ready for a marathon?" And I was like, I don't know about that. I've never run a marathon myself, but I'll do my best to help you out." And so that was a fun process with them of just trying to figure out like their training and what worked well. And I mean, looking back now, it was probably the most basic training program ever, but they just needed structure and they needed accountability. And I realized like, oh wow, like the accountability part of this is a very, very valuable piece of coaching. It's not writing the workouts is kind of the easy part, right? Like it's the communication, it's the trust, it's the accountability, it's being able to bounce ideas off each other. I mean, half the time I have athletes call me and they're just like, "Oh, I'm so stressed out. I'm supposed to do this workout tomorrow, and this work thing came up," and it's like, whoa, time out. Like, let's just work through this, and just helping them have the confidence to know they can move their workout to the next day. That was coaching for the week, right? Not actually what the workout was. So it started with just helping people in the running store and then helping friends get, prepared for races. And then when I moved to Portland, um, it started with, people I work with at Nike are like, "Hey, can you help me get ready for Hood to Coast? Can you help me get ready for this and that?" And I started putting more structured workouts together, like actually in Excel or in Training Peaks and saying, "Hey, here's what you need to do on a weekly basis. And let's talk at the end of the week so we can figure out how you respond to this and we'll adjust for next week." Um, and then I started coaching some people in Portland, just kind of on the side, like friends of friends who said, "Hey, I'm getting ready for this and that. Can you help me?" So it started that way. And then I was putting together a website and was going to start my own coaching website to just do this on the side, but take on a handful of athletes. And this was in 2018 maybe. And that's when Jay was like, "Hey, Ryan and I are starting Run Free. Why don't you come on board? Like, we're going to be brand new. We need coaches. You'd be a perfect fit. Come on board and join us." I'm like, "Okay, that sounds good." I knew Ryan already from Mammoth when I was in college, and then when I used to work at ASICS, so we crossed paths when he was running for ASICS. So it just worked out that Run Free was kind of launching at the same time as me about to launch my own. So I joined them in 2019, and it's been great. It's been great to just kind of evolve and coach people. And I have such a mix of athletes, and I think that's what I love so much about it. One of the things that I most enjoy about coaching is I really do enjoy coaching adult athletes who are balancing a lot of different activities because I can relate to them. And I like being able to figure out, it's like a puzzle, trying to just figure out how we can keep people motivated, how we can watch people continuing to improve while all my athletes are juggling full-time jobs, relationships. It's not just running; they're trying to accomplish as their goal here. And every athlete's different. I've got people chasing after OTQs. I've got people chasing after Boston qualifiers. I've got people that are relatively new to running and they just want to improve and just feel good about themselves. So it's been good to just be able to connect with a lot of different individuals, different personalities. Um, and it's funny, it's like we have one thing that's running that brings us all together. And then you realize we just have such a diverse community of individuals, which is great to be a part of.
Like you mentioned, you coach alongside Ryan Hall, and Ryan is very much tuned into sports psychology, which I love. The mental part of the sport is huge, and I imagine you share a similar philosophy, as do all the run free coaches who espouse the holistic five finger approach. But what is your spin on it? What is good coaching, head to toe, inside and out?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's so much to running to be successful in running that are outside just the physical parts of it, right? We all know you have to train physically. You got to get your miles in, you got to get your workouts in. But I think the one thing, and this is stuff that I have learned over the years and I'm continuing to learn, but I think it's the little things that I try and relay in my athletes. And that could be sleep, like focusing on sleep. Like sleep is so, so important. And we preach this all the time at Run Free. And I think it can just be so underestimated. And we all are constantly trying to get more and more sleep. But if we can just get more sleep, our energy levels are going to be better. Our quality of workouts are going to be better. We're going to be a happier person. We're going to be able to have more fun in the sport because it's not just this chore we're out there to do. So sleep, um, the equipment, like making sure you're running in the right type of footwear, making sure you're wearing the right type of apparel, um, diet. We have a nutritionist, dietitian on our team as well. I will constantly relate to athletes things that have worked well for me, but I am by no means an expert when it comes to diet. So we have someone on our team who is an expert in that. So we are able to like work with our athletes. When an athlete first comes on board, we help kind of track what they're eating throughout the week to just give them a baseline of like, are you getting in enough calories, which is a big one. A lot of times our athletes are just not eating enough. And so therefore their energy levels aren't where they need to be. Making sure they're getting the right types, good quality foods in their diet is important. I think the other one that we have really tried to hone in over the past few years too is strength training. I know when I was running in high school and college, I did not do a lot of strength training. And we are not big on like, you got to be in the weight room every single day. We're not doing like Ryan Hall type lifts, but like strength training is a big, big component to help increase a runner's ability, especially when it comes to lower leg lifting as well. So we're really big fans of the hex bar deadlift. And so we have a strength conditioning coach on board as well, who helps work with the coaches, who works with the athletes to make sure they're getting that strength work in. And then, yeah, I mean, I think to your point on the mental game, like just being able to have conversations, simple conversations with our athletes about what to think about. I know that when I have an athlete who is about to run a marathon, we discuss like what they need to think about the days leading up to a marathon. We always specifically have a very strategic race plan, but we purposely do it like a week out because I tell them I do not want to talk about the race the day before or the day of. Like you need to clear your mind. You need to get into a good place. We talk about what you need. Every individual is different, but do what you need to do to get in that relaxed state of mind to have the confidence when you step on the finish line or the starting line of what you're going to accomplish throughout that race. And just breaking the race up, I think every athlete's a little different, but when it comes to the marathon, it's a long distance, right? And a lot of our athletes are not just trying to cover 26.2 miles. They're trying to cover 26.2 miles in a certain time. And so I work back with my athletes a lot to encourage them to break it up into 5 mile segments and really just stay focused on that 5 miles. Don't think about what you still have left to go. Don't think about what you've already done. Stay focused on 5 miles at a time. And as you start going, it's just 5, 10, and then right after the 10, you get to the half. And then people get excited with their half split, right? 15, 20. And you'd be surprised that, when you break the race up like that, that can make a big, big difference. Because I remember the first time I ran a marathon, I thought about mile after mile after mile. And that was very, very daunting. And now it's breaking that race up really helps the athletes just not get overwhelmed in the midst of their marathon.
You mentioned earlier that accountability is one of the biggest reasons why people reach out for coaching or why someone might need a coach. And I've interviewed some coaches on this podcast who are a little more old school, you might say, and who think, look, it's not my job to motivate you. And then I've talked to other coaches who are a little bit more empathetic, more patient. Where do you fall on that spectrum?
I think that, first and foremost, the athlete has to be motivated, right? Like they have to be motivated to want to get out the door. They have to be motivated to have some sort of goal. Running has to be important enough, and there has to be some sort of driving motivation. Maybe it's to run faster, maybe it's to lose weight, maybe it's to manage depression, maybe it's because you just want to try experimenting something different, have a new challenge. But there's something that causes people to want to sign up. There's a financial commitment, obviously, each month as well. Like there has to be that driving motivation for people to start working with a coach and working with a program. But then after that, like I do think it's like if they've made that decision and that commitment, like as a coach, like I'm gonna hold them accountable of what their goals are. The way I look at it is like you wouldn't be working with me unless you wanted me to help keep you accountable. Now, every athlete's a little different, right? Like some athletes are they don't need or want a lot of one-on-one communication. It's like a hey, like I want you because I trust the workouts you're going to give me. And if I need you, I'll reach out. And then I have other athletes who they need to be able to communicate with me on a little bit more regular basis. And we figured that out over time, right? Like it's just like any relationship. You let it grow organically and you figure out what the athlete needs. And so I have some athletes who I might have to reach out to a little bit more, be like, hey, how'd that workout go? Are we going to do what we planned on doing next week or do we make some adjustments? And then I have some athletes who I get text messages every single day after their workouts when they give me their splits, right? This is how the splits went. This is what my heart rate was. This is how I felt. So it varies. So I think as a coach, what I try and do is I listen to the athlete and I figure out what they need. And I give a little bit more attention to athletes who need a little bit more attention. And then I have certain athletes who I know they perform better if I'm not all over them about what they're doing. That might put too much pressure on them to perform at a certain level. So I think it depends, but I am all for trying to keep athletes motivated. If that's what it's going to be. So yeah.
That's a great answer. A coach's physical presence is a powerful thing. And as online coaches, we don't have the opportunity to interact with athletes face to face unless you're talking like we are through Zoom. Um, we don't have the opportunity to see things in real time and forge that type of connection. But what can you do as an online coach to make up for that deficit and still build meaningful relationships?
No, you're right. I mean, I think that's the one thing that even took me time to kind of adjust to running when I was not living in Georgia anymore because I didn't have Jay there to watch me. And so I wasn't even doing online coaching. Online coaching really wasn't too much of a thing yet. And I was already trying to figure out, like, oh man, like, how do I make this work? And I think for me, then it was communication, like being able to communicate with Jay afterwards, like how a workout went, being able to call him to where he could sense in my voice, like if the emotion was like, oh, he had a good workout, he's really happy, or like, yeah, he had a really bad workout and he's stressed out, and we need to make some adjustments ASAP for next week. And so I try and do the exact same thing with my athletes now. And it takes time. Like it does take time. I am fortunate to have most of my athletes I've been working with now for over a year. And so that you really start to learn their personality, you start to learn what they need. So maybe that's texting, maybe that's phone calls, maybe that's FaceTiming, maybe that's scheduling Zoom calls every once in a while to see them face to face. But you have to just be able to, you have to communicate with the athletes. And I try and bring them together. We haven't done this in a while. We should do it again because it was fun. But like, especially when COVID hit, we did happy hours together, right? Like, and that was a lot of fun. And I brought multiple athletes together who were scattered across the country, but they all had me as their coach. And we all got together and we had a happy hour, we had a drink and we talked and we got to experience like each other together and talk about what we liked in running, but then we just talked about life. So like that was fun. Like that was one thing we did. And then, I would love to be at my athletes races all the time. It doesn't always work out like that. I have been fortunate enough to get to Eugene Marathon this year when I had an athlete running, and then at CIM this week when I had an athlete. And that's a really fun experience, especially if you haven't met the athlete before in person. And then you get to see the athlete for the first time and you're like hugging and embracing and sweating hugs and you've never even met each other. But again, like if you communicate enough, you have that trust and that relationship established. So I think it comes back to communication and being able to establish trust with your athlete.
Exactly. I don't know what your athlete load is, but I like to keep my number low, the number of athletes I coach, just so that I can devote that time to building those relationships and communicating as much as we need to.
Yeah, no, I'm the same. I like to keep the number low as well, so the quality of workouts and so that I have the ability to communicate with them. Um, and then and I'll tell athletes a lot too. I'm like, hey, I want you to send me a video of you running, or I want you to send me, some pictures of like what you said your shoes look like right now, or we get as much. I mean, today's world with technology being the way it is between Zoom and FaceTime, like we have the ability to see a lot. Um, and so yeah, we make it work. I've had some funny requests and discussions with my athletes before, but I'm like, hey, I know this sounds weird, but like this is going to help us out. Send me a video or a picture of this or that, and we do. We have a laugh about it, but we accomplish whatever the goal is too. So
So, Jared, to kick off our discussion on training theory and how you personally think about and construct training for your athletes, let me ask you this. Is there anything from the scientific literature or trends that you've observed at the top end of the sport that informs how you prescribe training or that you have a unique interest in?
I would say my training philosophies have definitely evolved a lot over the years. Um, I think it evolved based on my personal running. What I've been a guinea pig of myself for 20 years, so just trying different things. And then I think the distances make a big difference as well, right? Like I will be the first to tell you if an athlete comes to me and wants to run, a mile to 5K, I am not the guy for them. Like that's just not my specialty. I never really had a lot of success in that myself, and I just don't really that part of it. I just don't really. I am a half marathon guy, and I love that part of it. Um, and I've dabbled around over the years with mileage and intensity and altitude and different elements of training. And I think that for me now, I am comfortable with the half marathon and the marathon distances. And especially over the past 3 years, working with Jay and working with Ryan, like that is, really what has kind of built me to kind of have the confidence of what my training plan is, which I'm sure we'll kind of get into here now. But I think it's important as a coach to be confident in what you are capable of coaching at, right? And what distances you're comfortable coaching at. And there's plenty of coaches out there and there are plenty of athletes out there. So do what your expertise is. And for me, I've learned that's half marathon. So
Coaching education is very important. I'm sure you'd agree. And with knowledge being shared around the world these days, what reservoirs of knowledge do you find yourself consistently pulling from, whether it's print media, going to conferences, or personal contacts, mentors that you have? The list goes on.
yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it for me has been personal contacts. Like I'm not one that like from a coaching standpoint that likes to get really, really scientific about my coaching. I think it's a balance of science and art. And for me, it's been personal experiences working with a coach like Jay for 17 years. And then I'm grateful and fortunate enough to have Ryan Hall as a good friend and go to, right? Like that man has so much experience and has been through so much as an athlete and as a coach himself. He has had so many different great coaches over the years. And then obviously he's continuing to coach fantastic runners, his wife included. Um, and so that's been fun to just like pick up the phone and be like, Ryan, I have a question right now. Like, I want to do this, but from a timing perspective, what do you think we should do? So um, over the years, like Ryan and Jay have been tremendous resources for me as a coach.
In the coaching world, we seem to have arrived at a consensus where even some of today's Lydiard disciples would agree that all components of training need to be addressed throughout the year. So, why don't we just name what those components are for you? So, in other words, like the building blocks of training, the different energy systems we might want to train, or the variables, determinants of running performance.
Yeah, I love this stuff. So I remember, you've probably read Running with the Buffaloes, and I remember like reading Running with the Buffaloes, and was always like a huge Colorado and Wetmore fan in college myself. And so I can remember like at the beginning of that book, how it started off, right? Like all the different phases of training that they went through. And it was like this big base phase where you just run a lot of mileage and you run as much mileage as you possibly can without breaking. And that's all you did, right? Like you got it over a variety of different terrain, you got hill work in, but you just ran mileage. And then you start to incorporate strides and you start to incorporate some longer workouts, but you're still really focusing on building a big base. And I literally think triangle, right? It's like you're building as big of a base as you possibly can. And then as the season goes on, you slowly start to get to more race specific stuff until you get to the very tip and you're like a week out from your championship race and you're doing like super, super short intervals, really, really fast with a lot of rest. And I think that process works for some people. And then as I was in college, I was always like super inspired by Scott Simmons' training methods and philosophies. And Scott Simmons, at the time, I went to an NAIA school. And so at the time, Scott Simmons was coaching a handful of super talented athletes at Virginia Intermont, which was an NAIA school in Virginia. Fernando Cabada and a handful of other athletes. And then he's now obviously moved on doing stuff with American Distance Project in Colorado Springs and all. And he started to kind of have this philosophy, and Jay knew him. So then Jay would kind of start trying some of the stuff that he was doing. And we kind of tried this stuff together, which was this idea of don't eliminate something throughout the training count, like throughout the year, right? Like, yeah, you got to hit your mileage and you got to maintain mileage, which is a good thing, yes. But don't forget to hit that sub threshold, or maybe what people will call tempo word. Don't forget to do your strides throughout the week. Don't forget to hit like anaerobic pace. Don't forget that 5K, 10K work. Like you got to make sure you're hitting all these different components. And that kind of worked for me. And I think I still kind of keep a little bit of that in my back pocket to this day. And I think and then as I start to fast forward and evolve with like Ryan and more of the run free approach, when it comes to half marathon and marathon training, I kind of take that first example of like Wetmore and I've kind of like flipped it over and do the opposite now, right? Like as a marathon runner or a half marathon runner, man, we spend so much time doing what you would call quote unquote base training, right? Like we do a lot of mileage, we do a lot of hills. So before we get to that phase of the marathon block, I like to actually start doing shorter, more 5K, 10K work. So a lot of times my athletes, when we start up, if we've got the time, now sometimes you get an athlete like, hey, I got a marathon in 12 weeks. Obviously, if you have a marathon in 12 weeks, you're having to focus on the more specific marathon stuff. But if I have an athlete and I've got months to work with them before we get to a marathon phase, I got a couple right now. What we're doing right now, we're doing short, fast workouts. We are slowly building up the long run and getting them used to doing some faster running at the end of their long run. We're getting them used to doing like cruise miles or broken up tempos, because I want them to start getting used to running a little bit faster pace that they maybe can't run for a full 4, 5, or 6 mile tempo yet, but the goal is to one day get there. So let's break it up with a short rest. I've got them lifting. I've got them doing a lot of core and strength work right now. And then as we start to get closer to the actual, kind of that more 12 to 14 weeks out, then we'll start to do more of the longer tempo stuff. Some of the interval sessions will start to get a little bit longer, and we focus more on that longer stuff, which kind of is like base phase. But I don't like to keep an athlete doing the same thing for too long. So when you have a marathoner doing short, fast stuff, that's fun and exciting to see. Because one, they're like, oh my God, I've never run this fast before. Or my form felt like I was all over the place. Or that felt super awkward. But if you can get comfortable running fast paces for 200s and 400s, all that's going to do is start to make miles and 2 miles start to feel more comfortable, which makes half marathon pace feel more comfortable. And if we can get half marathon pace more faster, being more comfortable, that only is going to help the marathon pace being more comfortable. So that's my philosophy of like, we're going to start doing some shorter, faster stuff, and then we'll build up. And it doesn't always work perfectly, but the idea is like, hey, that pace starts to make paces that work kind of in the middle, like that sub threshold, a little bit faster than tempo that were really uncomfortable for me before, starts to make those more comfortable and able to handle easier.
Well said, Jared. And I do the same. What we're referring to here is reverse linear periodization. But I want to go back to those components that you did allude to, and just in case we have some listeners that want to make sure that they are incorporating all the components that are, I want to say, required or that are important in our training. So we mentioned easy runs. I think that's the bulk of our runs throughout the week, where most of our volume is coming from, right? So your easy runs, your strides, your sub threshold or threshold running, your VO2 max or that 5K work, 3K, 5K work that you might do, and also a quality long run. Did I miss anything that you think is important?
Nope, I think you got it all hit. I mean, I think that type schedule works for me throughout most of the year. It's just a matter of what we're training for. And so early in that phase, there's still plenty of easy runs. The long run might not be super long, depending on the athlete, it might be somewhere between 10 and 14 miles, and the intensity is not super intense. And we're really focusing more on the faster, more interval stuff during the week. And then as we get closer to the marathon stuff, we start putting a little bit more emphasis on the long runs that have our tempo threshold work built in. Because I think the other thing you have to keep in mind, marathon training is hard. We're tired. We're running a lot of mileage. The workouts are longer. We're having to be hyper focused on fueling, getting in enough hydration, getting enough calories. And so when we start doing long runs, start doing workouts within the long runs, we start doing longer workouts during the week, we're tired. So getting the strength work in, getting the core work in gets a little bit more challenging then, right? So if we can really focus earlier in the training phase when we are a little bit fresher, we're doing stuff we're not as familiar with, we're getting a little bit faster. Athletes have the time, the energy, the focus to do the strength work, to do the core work, which really helps to prepare the body or almost prepare that foundation, callus the body, so to speak, for marathon training that's coming. So I really like to look at it as we're trying to get the body prepared for the intense long marathon training that's coming.
When we talk about different models of periodization or how your training intensity is distributed throughout the week or throughout the macro cycle, do you think your training falls more under a polarized model, a pyramidal model, or a threshold model of periodization?
For marathoners, I'm going to fall more into probably what you would define as like a threshold. I think if we have one workout to pick, it's always going to be the long run. And when I use long runs, like it's very rare that my athletes just do easy time on their feet. They will sometimes, but most of the time their long runs are going to be some sort of very structured quality. And so I think that is what helps prepare you the most for a half marathon and marathon. Now I obviously always love it when we have the time and the ability to get in faster stuff too, because I think that helps make the paces feel easier. But I am definitely going to be more hyper focused on that threshold piece of the training for the marathoners.
And I agree with you that science can only take us so far, and it's really the art of coaching that might make the difference in more cases than not. The art of coaching, in my opinion, is determining what kind of athlete you're working with and how to design someone's training to maximize their training response. So, like we spoke earlier about your own case, lower mileage, lower training density. But now, besides injury history, if we know that someone breaks down because they can't run that much, excluding that, what are some of the other things that we can key in on to determine someone's physiological profile, their strengths, their weaknesses? And do you believe that we should favor one type of stimulus over another? So, for example, if we have a runner who has a good engine, but they have a weak neuromuscular system. In other words, their ability to produce and transfer power affecting their elasticity and running economy. Are we going to give them more of what they're good at? So, more of that threshold stimulus, or more of what they need help with, maybe some of that power stuff, or stick to a balanced, periodized approach?
That's a fantastic question. I think some of it depends on how long you're working with the athlete, right? Like if I have an athlete, sometimes I have an athlete who signs up and says, "Hey, I'm getting ready for a marathon. I just want to do a 6 month training program." I don't really have time to always work on what those big weaknesses are or opportunities to improve that too much. If they have a goal and we have a short period of time, we're probably going to focus more on what they do respond really well to. So for the sake of this example, let's say an athlete comes in and they just, maybe I'm talking about myself here. They don't respond very well to the track. They don't respond very well to the shorter, faster stuff, but they do have a big engine and they respond well to the longer stuff. We're going to focus on the longer stuff for a couple of reasons. One, physically, we know they're going to benefit more from doing something that they can gain a bigger advantage of for the longer stuff. And then I think when you talk about the mental side of things, if you have an athlete spending too much time doing something that they're just not good at, that's going to get frustrating for the athlete. And then what we talked about earlier, as far as like the fun part of it, like if it starts feeling like it's too much work and the joy of that running is coming out of them, you gotta switch it up, right? And so I think it just depends. But I have some athletes, like some of my athletes who I've worked with for a long time. I'm working with one right now, and his goal race is Chicago Marathon next fall. So we have all the time in the world to work together. And we're trying some new things right now. And he prefers the longer stuff. But we have agreed, let's stick to about 6 to 8 weeks of doing some shorter, faster stuff right now, because I do think this can help benefit you in kind of that like 5K to 10K range. And so we're doing that. And so far it's going well. But if I only had him for one marathon training block, we wouldn't do that. I would assess and say, hey, this is our goal. We're going to work on what your strength is right now. So I think to answer your question, like it depends on the athlete and it depends on how much time. I would like to work on weaknesses, absolutely. But I don't want to ever forget what makes the athlete respond the best to training. And that's like, with me, for example, like in college, Jay had all those 4 years, 5 years to deal with figuring out what my weaknesses were. And then finally he's like, you're not good on the track. We're working on the roads now. And we're doing longer stuff.
Let's talk quickly about monitoring training, how you monitor the training of your athletes. Like, what metrics do you like to track, and how important you think is subjective monitoring? In other words, the athlete's direct feedback when they report to you on how they're feeling. Because I think all that is really important in the decision and adjustment making process.
No, absolutely. I mean, I communicate with my athletes usually at the end of each week on the weekends. And I think as an online coach, it's critical. It's so important to make sure you're checking in with them to understand how they're feeling. We have metrics like, we use Training Peaks. So we have metrics to be able to see like what their pace was. A lot of my athletes are really good about downloading and if they have a Garmin, they'll download their Garmin split so I can be able to see. If they're using Strava or something, it's great. You can go and you can check to see what the elevation was, what the temperature was like, heart rate, what their heart rate was. Sometimes I'll have athletes check their resting heart rate to kind of get a baseline. And then if they start to feel under the weather, usually if the heart rates have spiked, then we start to kind of have an idea of like, hey, we might need to dial it back a little bit. So we definitely look at and I consider those metrics. And then very, very big on just like, how do you feel? How does your body feel this week? And then, once you get to know your athlete pretty well too, it's like, hey, how's life going right now? Oh, you know what? Like the kids are starting back school this week. It's going to be really hectic, or my spouse is out of town traveling for work this week. I've got more responsibility. Those are all factors that I take into account when I'm building their training program. So all of a sudden it's like, oh, you're going to be really busy this week. Okay, I'm not gonna have you do 10 by K at race pace with short rest. We're gonna do a fartlek this week instead. And then next week we will come and have a more intense session because why am I gonna set my athlete up for failure when I already know they're going into a busy, stressful week? So and again, I think that comes back to why I like to work with athletes who are balancing a lot because I'm in the same boat. I can relate to them. And I know how that will impact them because I've been through that myself. You try and take on a hard workout and you have a stressful week, it's not going to go well. So I'm not going to set my athletes up for failure if that's what they're got going on for a given week.
One of our jobs is to prescribe intensity for our athletes, and coaches have various ways of doing this. Let's use an example. Let's say you want your runner to do 12 to 16 by 400 meters on the track with a 100-meter jog recovery. So this would be more of a broken tempo or cruise interval stimulus. You don't want them to run this too fast. They also you don't want them to run it too slow. You want them to be in the right zone for it. So like zone 2 in a 3 zone model, that heavy domain of exercise. How do you come up with their pace? Or maybe it's not pace for you. Maybe it's more of an effort-based approach. That's what I'm trying to get at here.
Yeah, so I think being an online coach, that's one thing that can get challenging is figuring out paces for athletes. And I struggle with that because I'm not there physically to see them. And if they start to have consistent workouts and are hitting pretty consistent paces, you can start to nail it down a little bit. But I do a lot of effort-based stuff. And I'm okay with that. Another coach that I have come to get to know over the years and admire a lot is Jonesy, Steve Jones. And so he is very, very big on effort-based workouts as well. And I've had conversations with him before. And I think there's a benefit to that. I think it takes a level of pressure and stress off of the athlete and allows them to just relax and run to where they might run faster off effort than they do at a given pace. So that's some of it. But I think too, it goes back to kind of like the time of the season and what we're in the middle of training for. So it's funny you mentioned 12 by 400 with that not super fast because I will do a workout similar to that actually early in the phase, give them short rest at not a super crazy fast pace because I'm trying to start building up their ability to run thresholds at a faster pace. And again, like if they can't go run 3, 4, 5, 6 mile tempo at a certain pace, they can run a 400 at that pace off short rest. And then they maybe can start to get to where they run 800s at that pace. And then maybe they're running 1200s at that pace. And then they're running miles. Now, this isn't an example of something you would do all in one season. This is when you have athletes you've worked with for years and you can build and develop on this over time. But then I also, man, like I like to just mix it up a little bit in the middle of marathon season and give them sometimes just something short and fast to just turn the legs over. I've done that and I really enjoy it. I think marathon training can get very stale and very boring sometimes because we get so locked into just running a certain pace all the time. And let's say they have a big tempo run coming up, a big long tempo coming up, and we've been doing a lot of really long things. It's not uncommon for me to be like, hey, on Wednesday, you're doing a short, fast workout because I just want you to freshen up. I want you to lighten up your legs a little bit. I don't want you doing a lot of heavy stuff because I want you feeling good for Saturday's workout. And you're going to just turn over your legs and run fast. And you know what it does? The athletes just enjoy it. They enjoy it. It gives them confidence that they can run fast again. And I think that's important. We absolutely have to have that for marathon training.
That's a great answer. Okay, last training related question, Jared. I know you did a lot of cross training when you got injured, and lately there's been a lot of talk surrounding the benefits of cross training, even if you're not injured. Would
Yes.
you say this is something more coaches should add to their program? And if so, where do you think it fits into the whole puzzle of training? Like sometimes I think, well, it should be added as a second session. So if you can't run twice a day, maybe that second session could be a cross training session. Or if you're a little more injury susceptible, it can replace some of your easy miles. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, personally for me, I like cross training, and some of that's probably just because I've had success with it myself. and it's worked well. I think you can look at it in a couple of different ways. I think cross training can be a great way to get some extra cardio in, whether you're on, it depends on what you're doing, right? Like if you're doing rowing or elliptical, or pool running, that's a great way to get some extra cardio in. If you're swimming, I think that's a great way to get some extra cardio in. But one of the things that I think comes from easy, like a true double run, like a 30 to 40 minute super slow shakeout run, is just the circulation of blood flow and just moving the body. And man, you can mimic that in the pool. You can mimic that on an easy row. You can mimic that sometimes on a walk. You can mimic that just spinning your legs on the bike. Like when I do stuff on the bike, a lot of times it's not at high intensity. Now I have sometimes we'll do it, but like a lot of times I just want to go move my legs for 20 or 30 minutes. And so I think there's that benefit to it. Um, and then I think it comes in as a huge critical piece when you're injured. I think if you're injured, you can maintain a lot of fitness by keeping the intensity super, super high. I have a friend who when he gets banged up, he is a cross training king. Like he can just do it and it works really well for him. But I think athletes need to make sure they're being mindful to like what works well for them. Some athletes just don't like to cross train when they're injured. And I think that's fine. Like emotionally, that might be really, really hard because you're not out running. So listen to your body. Like trying to get on the bike and just hammer for an hour when you can't run, you might be doing yourself more harm than good. Maybe your body just needs and mind just needs a full reset. So I think it's depending on how you look at it. But I personally am a big fan of the cross training activities.
All right, Jared, let's wrap up with our rapid fire segment. I've got 6 rapid fire questions for you to finish on a little fun note. So let's try to answer these in a sentence or less. How does that sound?
All right, let's do it.
Number 1, what's the biggest mistake you see runners make with their training?
I think if we're thinking about marathon athletes here, I think sometimes athletes can get too focused on the trying to run too much mileage and the quantity, and they overlook the quality of trying to run the pace they're looking to intend to run in the marathon. So too much mileage and not enough quality.
Number 2, what is one exercise that everyone should do for strength and or mobility?
I think for strength, my secret would be the hex bar deadlift. I think the hex bar deadlift is a very safe lifting strength routine for runners, and I think it hits all of the major components that we need. So that's what I would say from a strength standpoint. And then when you say mobility, I think foot mobility and ankle mobility, and I think that is so important for a runner to have great foot and ankle mobility. And there's a number of ways you can do that, but you can start by just doing simple, like spelling the alphabet with your foot is a great way to just start increasing that mobility.
Number 3, fastest marathons that you're aware of. Name 2 or 3 marathons. Let's say someone wants to go out and run a fast time.
Like what I think is a fast marathon.
Yeah, courses that you've run on or that you've heard are fast courses to run on.
Oh, courses. Okay, yeah. That's an easy one for me. My go-to, I tell people athletes all the time, if you want to run a fast race, CIM in December and Grandma's in June. I think there are plenty of other great marathons that have or that are great for sightseeing. But if you want to run a fast race here in the United States, CIM or Grandma's are your go-tos.
Number 4, how much longer will Ryan Hall's 59:43 hold up?
Well, whew, I hope a long time. And the fact that Ryan did that without super shoes, and we've had plenty of athletes now in super shoes, and they still haven't accomplished that. I would have thought that would have already been broken with super shoes by now. So the fact that it hasn't, I mean, I'm gonna go hopefully another 10 years or so without that getting broken.
It's amazing, isn't it, that it hasn't been broken
Yeah.
yet.
Yep. Yep.
Number 5, is there anything you'd change about the sport at either the amateur or professional level to make it better for participants?
So I think we're in the middle of that right now. I think that running and track and field as a from a fan standpoint for a long time was way too boring, and it wasn't exciting for the fans. It wasn't exciting for the fans to interact with the athletes. It wasn't exciting for the fans to understand what was going on. And I think we're seeing a lot of that changing right now. The work that Citius Mag is doing, the work that Tracklandia is doing out here in Portland, like getting people really engaged with the sport. I think athletes' involvement with social media has helped with that a lot. So I'm excited to continue seeing the trend that the track and field community is coming together, and I think that's only going to continue to improve and just get people excited about this sport and it continue to evolve. And I think that's one of the reasons we're seeing younger kids running so fast at this age, because they're aware of this sport, which when you and I were in high school, we were not as much.
And lastly, favorite runner, favorite race, or favorite moment in athletics history?
Ooh, that's a tough one. I think I've had a lot of favorite runners over the years. I'm gonna have to give you two. The first one, Eliud Kipchoge, huge Eliud Kipchoge fan. I think that what he has done for this sport, I think what he has done for the marathon is just incredible. I think we saw an individual just this past weekend debut marathon running 2:01. That wouldn't have happened if we hadn't had someone like Eliud laying that, inspiring people to do stuff like that, and just is such a great human being as well. Um, and then second, Ryan. Ryan's obviously a good friend of mine, but Ryan has also been an athlete that I've looked up to for years, and I think his New York City Marathon performance in 2007, I'll never forget watching that. So those are the two that come to mind when you ask me that.
Perfect. Jared, it's been a great conversation. Where can people find you? How can they connect with you or reach out to you for coaching?
Yeah, absolutely. I think Run Free Training is our website. You'll be able to find myself as well as all the other coaches located there, as well as all the information, a lot of what we talked about today with our 5 finger approach. And then I am always willing to answer questions for people when they send me questions on Instagram. That's probably my most active social media account. And somehow I got Jared Carson. So it's pretty easy to find me on that.
I'll leave those links in the show notes. And once again, thank you, listeners, for tuning in every month. I hope you found value in this conversation. For Jared Carson, I'm Jonathan Mederos, reminding you as we sign out to think about the long term, think about running as a lifestyle. If you take care of your body and you train smart, you can continue doing what you love for a much longer time. Till next time.